Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time. Today we are taking an exceptionally deep dive into the high-wind, low-moral world of the Yorkshire moors. Emily Brontë's Wuthering Heights.
It's a really foundational work in English literature, but, what's so fascinating is that it's a book almost everyone knows, or thinks they know.
Right.
And yet it's so often fundamentally misread. When people think of Wuthering Heights, they immediately conjure these images of sweeping, tragic, gothic romance.
Yes, the star-crossed lovers running passionately across windswept hills, that deep, irresistible connection.
Exactly. And that reduction is the critical error, isn't it?
It is. Because if you boil it down to just a tragic love story, two people who were meant to be together but couldn't be, you miss this immense social commentary that's hidden right beneath all that emotional thunder.
Precisely. What looks like romantic passion on the surface is, when you really look closely, a kind of fierce emotional extremity that's actually functioning as a powerful form of social analysis.
So the intensity, it isn't just a coincidence. It's not just for the drama of it.
No, it's a structural breakdown. The absolute relentless intensity of Heathcliff and Catherine isn't just. It's not just personal pathology. It's not a simple case of a bad guy or a selfish girl.
It's a direct consequence, a violent consequence of the rigid, cruel, and, unforgiving social and property structures of 19th century rural England.
Yes, those systems demanded conformity. And when this kind of passion bucked that conformity, the results were just devastating.
The novel is basically giving us a case study of how structural violence, the violence that's just inherent in class divisions and exclusion, translates directly into domestic, emotional, and physical violence.
That's a perfect feedback loop.
So our mission today is to look past the tragic romance. We're going to examine obsession, inheritance, and power in the novel, not as individual failings, but as these self-perpetuating closed-loop systems.
Systems engineered by social constraints, by economic reality, and by these really deep-seated generational resentments.
We're peeling back the layers of dust and more mist and trauma that cling to Wuthering Heights to really see the mechanism underneath.
And to really appreciate that mechanism, you have to set the stage. We have to go back to 19th century England.
Right.
Emily Brontë published this in 1847. It was a time defined by intense class stratification and this profound societal focus on land ownership and inheritance. Who owned what was everything?
And the Brontës themselves lived in this really isolated world of the Yorkshire moors. That setting isn't just atmosphere, is it? It's a necessary component.
Oh, absolutely. By placing Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange 4 miles apart, completely cut off from the polite society of London or even large towns, Brontë created a kind of laboratory for human behavior.
There are no external checks, no moral authority stepping in to say, hey, maybe don't do that.
None. The only external forces are the violent weather and the equally violent rigidity of the land laws. It's a perfect closed system.
And it's controversial. I mean, that's putting it mildly.
It was. This book just utterly defied the conventional expectations of sentimentality that Victorian readers really wanted. They wanted clear moral lessons.
And they got raw, messy, and morally ambiguous people instead.
The book is filled with these unchecked, ferocious passions, domestic violence. I mean, you think of Hindley's Descent and this moral ambiguity that challenges you on every single page.
There are no easy heroes or villains. There are just damaged people reacting, often violently, to their circumstances. Brontë forces us to watch cruelty happen and then be reciprocated, which must have been shocking at the time.
She was writing about the darkness inside those rigid structures, and when you look at the whole narrative arc, it strongly supports this central idea. The cycle of cruelty across generations in this book is created and sustained by a fusion of unchecked obsession, class exclusion, and inherited resentment.
It's a closed-loop system of toxicity.
And it only changes when the economic and social rules that govern it are finally rejected by the next generation.
And we see the very start of this self-perpetuating cruelty in the earliest memories that Nellie Dean shares.
Mm-hmm.
The moment old Mr. Earnshaw brings Heathcliff home, this little foundling, he disrupts the entire established social hierarchy of the house. That one simple paternal act introduces the contaminant that breeds all the bad feeling that comes after.
That's a crucial distinction. The problem isn't Heathcliff himself, not initially. The problem is the existing hierarchy's inability to absorb him without violence. Hindley, the legitimate heir, immediately sees Heathcliff as a threat.
A usurper, right, of his father's affections and his privilege.
Exactly. And the cruelty that's then directed at Heathcliff is immediately documented by Nellie as atrocious.
Right, and this is where it moves beyond just simple revenge. This abuse, this systemic exclusion and torment that Hindley inflicts. It doesn't lead to forgiveness in Heathcliff. It doesn't lead to passive suffering.
No, it leads to calculation. He internalizes the rules of violence.
There's that chilling line. After being tormented by Hindley, the young Heathcliff is just leaning on his elbow, and he tells Nellie, in this incredibly rational tone, "I'm trying to settle how I shall pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait, if I can only do it at last."
That is not a passionate outburst. That's a business plan.
Exactly. When I read that, it struck me, this isn't teenage anger. This is a calculated, almost mechanical reaction. He's translating his pain into a weapon and creating a long-term plan for reciprocal revenge.
He is learning perfectly the language of power that his oppressors taught him.
And this learned response, this idea that property and patience are the ultimate weapons, it becomes the blueprint for his entire life.
Okay, so before we really get into those mechanics, we have to talk about how Brontë makes sure that we, the readers, are constantly questioning what we're being told.
The narrative structure itself, it's so complex, and it's key to this whole structural analysis.
We don't get the story straight. We get this brutal history filtered through two very distinct and profoundly biased lenses.
And we start with Mr. Lockwood, the ultimate outsider.
The ultimate outsider. He is everything the Heights and Grange inhabitants are not. He's reserved, he's fastidiously proper, self-interested, and just astonishingly naive about the emotional world he stumbled into.
He's almost a figure of fun, isn't he? A gentleman visitor who thinks the world should reflect his own delicate sensibilities. His first interactions with Heathcliff are just hilarious in their awkwardness.
They are. Lockwood shows up, and the only greeting he gets is this challenge about who owns the land. Heathcliff says, "Thrushcross Grange is my own, sir." And the walk-in he gives Lockwood notes, was uttered with closed teeth and expressed the sentiment, "Go to the deuce."
And Lockwood is so self-absorbed that he projects his own issues onto Heathcliff. He says Heathcliff is exaggeratedly reserved than myself.
He's complimenting his own emotional coldness.
He is. And he only goes back for a second visit because he feels sociable compared with him. His presence just frames the story as remote and bizarre because he simply lacks the vocabulary to understand what he's seeing.
And you see his limited perspective most clearly during that terrifying ghost sequence early on. He's forced to stay the night because of the snow and the hostility of the servants.
Who, he says, put the copestone on my rage and humiliation. Such a Victorian phrase.
It is. A copestone is the finishing stone on a wall, so he's saying their rudeness was the final insult to his dignity.
And this man, who is so obsessed with his own dignity, then has this incredibly intense dream. He mistakes the sound of a fir bough for the fingers of a child.
The ice-cold hand of Catherine Linton, who says she's been a waif for 20 years.
And his reaction is pure self-centered terror. He doesn't feel pity, he feels threatened. He pulls her wrist onto the broken glass and rubs it to and fro till the blood ran down. His reaction to this supernatural sorrow is literally crueler than the ghost itself.
He harms her just to make her go away. He doesn't process the profound tragedy of it all. He only processes the inconvenience to his sleep.
And then he leaves the moors, totally untouched by the human suffering he witnessed, just concluding that the Heights inhabitants are inhospitable ancestors.
He's the filter of superficiality. He shows us how not to read the story. And then we shift to Nellie Deem.
The primary, and I would argue, much more dangerous narrator.
Dangerous is the right word. She's been there for 18 years, serving both generations. She's deeply embedded as a foster sister, a nurse, a servant. But she is never just reporting facts. She is the moral editor of the entire history.
Her judgment is constantly coloring what she tells us. She's not shy about it. When she's talking about Catherine's youth, she just says, "I own I did not like her," after her infancy was passed.
She admits she tried to bring down her arrogance. She thinks Catherine is becoming too wild, too unruly.
So is she actively manipulative? Or is she just a product of a rigid system that demands servants maintain order? Her actions seem to be based entirely on her own moral judgment of the characters.
I think she's both. She lives by the rules of propriety, and her actions are all about maintaining what she sees as moral and social order. And we see her critical failure to act when Catherine has that fit of passion.
Right. She knows Catherine is suffering, but she believes it's a performance. She thinks a person who could plan the turning of her fits of passion to account beforehand might manage to control herself tolerably.
In other words, she sees a genuine psychological breakdown as a manipulative temper tantrum.
And because of that judgment, she chooses not to tell Edgar how truly ill Catherine is. She lets the situation escalate.
That calculated non-intervention, rooted in her own judgment, directly propels the tragedy forward. She is a critical actor, not just a passive storyteller.
She gives us all this minute detail, which Lockwood insists on. But she flavors every detail with her own common-sense skepticism.
And that layered structure is the whole point. You, the listener, you get these intense emotional events. Heathcliff sobbing, Catherine's delirium. But they're always filtered through Nellie's restrictive judgment and Lockwood's comical misunderstanding.
It forces you to constantly analyze the source material and search for the structural facts beneath the emotional storytelling.
Okay, let's unpack those core structures. Because without understanding the 19th century context, you just see passion. With it, you see the vice grip of economic reality.
And foremost among them has to be class, hierarchy, and inheritance.
Absolutely. In this world, control of Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights determines everything. Social position, opportunity, who you can marry, your personal power.
And Brontë shows how fragile that system is. A single act of paternal love, Mr. Earnshaw preferring Heathcliff, disrupts the entire natural hierarchy and immediately breeds that bad feeling.
The system demands that the lines of privilege be maintained. So when the patriarch dies, Hindley, the legitimate heir, acts immediately to restore order. He treats Heathcliff as a beggarly interloper and systematically deprives him of education, forcing him into labor.
He's acting on the principle of his birthright. His status as a gentleman requires that Heathcliff be put back in his proper low social place. But that act of restoring hierarchy is itself an act of structural violence.
Which Heathcliff then internalizes, and the power of the land is absolute. Heathcliff's eventual return is only powerful because he has acquired wealth. We never find out how, but it's clear he has the capital to leverage the system.
And he immediately begins to systematically acquire the land. First, by exploiting Hindley's financial ruin. He takes mortgages on Wuthering Heights.
Which is only possible because Hindley, after his wife Frances dies, descends into what the novel calls reckless dissipation.
We should probably clarify that term. Dissipation here means destructive self-indulgence. Heavy gambling, drinking, ignoring all his responsibilities. He's essentially gambling his house away.
And Heathcliff, using his new wealth, becomes Hindley's main creditor. He encourages Hindley's downward spiral, giving him money he knows Hindley can't repay. He ensures that when Hindley dies, Wuthering Heights will legally belong to him. It's a slow, methodical, financial execution.
And then he does the same with the next generation. He ensures his son, Linton, becomes the prospective owner of Thrushcross Grange by forcing that marriage between Linton and young Cathy.
This guaranteed takeover of both estates is his ultimate systemic triumph. It's not enough for him to be rich. He has to own the literal ground his oppressors stood on.
Which leads right into the second system, domestic power and dependency. Because these two houses are so isolated, they function as these closed private systems where tyranny can just thrive.
Absolutely. Shielded from external morality, from the law, from public opinion. The isolation lets the abuse escalate without any checks. Wuthering Heights becomes truly infernal after Hindley's wife dies.
The book describes a house so toxic that the curate stops calling. Nobody decent dares to come near it.
And you see Hindley's unchecked power in these small, terrible details. He tries to force Nellie to swallow a carving knife. He drops his own son, Hareton, over the banister in a drunken fit and then blames Nellie for catching him.
That toxic environment where violence is normal and power is absolute directly molds the next generation.
And it's all rooted in the third system. Social exclusion leading to reciprocal revenge. Heathcliff's initial status as a gypsy brat, a beggarly interloper, that's the structural injury. He's propertyless, rootless, defined only by his lack of belonging.
And his response is key. He doesn't seek acceptance. He seeks equivalence through calculated power.
His first thought after abuse is that the thought of revenge is what keeps him going. I only wish I knew the best way. Let me alone and I'll plan it out. While I'm thinking of that, I don't feel pain.
It's a chilling insight. Cruelty, for Heathcliff, becomes a predictable, learned response to exclusion. It's not a spontaneous evil. It's the only form of power he's been taught to respect.
And this brings us to that fourth systemic conflict, nature versus civilization, embodied by the two houses.
The Heights and the Grange.
Exactly. The wild, exposed Heights represents raw, uncivilized, overwhelming passion. It's rough, its inhabitants are rude, the weather batters it, it's pure, uncontrolled emotion.
And you contrast that with the civilized, confining Grange. which represents fragile order. Its beauty depends on suppressing wildness, maintained by wealth and delicate social customs. Its windows look out onto a manicured park, protected from the brutal moor winds.
Catherine's breakdown perfectly illustrates how this conflict tears a person apart. She's physically living in the Grange as Mrs. Linton, but her mind, her soul, is trapped back at the Heights.
In her delirium, she totally rejects her life as Mrs. Linton, the lady of Thrushcross Grange.
She desperately longs to be half savage and hardy and free on the heather. She tears at her civilized clothes. She tries to throw open the window to the rough air.
She says her preference is for Heathcliff's turbulent nature over Edgar's cold blood, right? That Edgar's veins are full of ice water, while hers are boiling.
She understands that choosing Edgar was a choice for the system, for stability, for wealth, but that choice destroyed the part of her that belonged to the Heights. This conflict between external conformity and internal wildness is structurally impossible to resolve.
And her body is where the system ultimately fails.
So, if these social, economic, and domestic systems are the problem, then Heathcliff is the system's most dangerous, most meticulously crafted product. He's not just a bad person, he's the inevitable result of that structural injury.
That's the key distinction. His origin found starving and houseless in Liverpool renders him property-less and socially rootless from the very start. He's the perfect target for exclusion.
And his identity is formed purely through resistance. Nellie sees how he stands Hindley's blows without winking or shedding a tear.
And she mistakes that for hardness, but it's really resilience. He learns that vulnerability is fatal, and the only way to survive the system is to become harder than the system itself.
So when he returns with money, his cruelty is no longer reactive. It's a calculated, reciprocal strategy designed to methodically dismantle the entire social structure that oppressed him. He's not just seeking emotional satisfaction, he's seeking a structural victory.
We saw that with Hindley, the exploitation of his dissipation, the mortgages taking the Heights. But the most clinical, disturbing example of his systematic cruelty is his treatment of Isabella Linton.
Isabella is a victim of the romantic narrative. She sees Heathcliff as a hero of romance, and she ignores all the evidence to the contrary.
And Heathcliff encourages this, not because he loves her, but because he sees her foolishness, as an opportunity for revenge against her brother Edgar.
He tells Nellie this with terrifying clarity. He says he can hardly regard her in the light of a rational creature for persisting in this fabulous notion of him. He sees her affection not as a compliment, but as proof of her stupidity.
And he's openly cruel from the start. He admits, the first thing she saw me do on coming out of the Grange was to hang up her little dog.
And when she pleaded for it, his first words were a wish that he could hang everyone belonging to her except Catherine. He wished death on her entire family, and she still ran off with him.
I have to stop you there, because that shows something crucial about the power of that romantic narrative. Isabella is so trapped by the societal expectation of finding a grand, passionate love that she ignores the literal, explicit warning signs.
Yes, the system of romance blinds her to the system of cruelty. And Heathcliff knows this and uses it. He says his goal is to torment her until she hates him, to prove her idiocy in loving him.
But even then, the sadism is less important than the strategic value.
Exactly. He tells Nellie that if Isabella wanted to go, she could, because the nuisance of her presence outweighs the gratification to be derived from tormenting her.
So he only keeps her to get at Edgar.
He promises Nellie that Isabella will be Edgar's proxy in suffering till he could get hold of him. His marriage is a legal contract for proxy torment.
This cold, calculating pursuit of power through property defines his later life. He manipulates inheritance laws, the weakness of others, Hindley's debts, his own son Linton's physical frailty to achieve total domination.
And this is where his structural focus is clearest. He views his own son Linton not as a human being, but as a legal means to an end.
He calls him a whey-faced, whining wretch.
He despises him. He only endures the whelp because my son is prospective owner of your place. That legal status, that guarantee of ownership over Thrushcross Grange, is the sole consideration that lets him tolerate the boy's existence.
He doesn't see a son. He sees a walking, breathing legal deed.
And he applies the same systemic cruelty to Hareton Earnshaw. He could have raised Hareton as a gentleman. Instead, he takes a pride in his brutishness, ensuring he's never taught to read or write.
It's not random cruelty, it's deep structural vengeance. He wants to ensure the legitimate heir of the Heights is reduced to a savage, permanently reversing the class exclusion he suffered.
He sees it as his ultimate triumph over Hindley. He says, his had first-rate qualities and they are lost. He has nothing to regret. His revenge isn't just about pain. It's about destroying the social and intellectual potential of the aristocracy.
Okay, so we have to address the emotional core of this whole thing, love and obsession. In this systemic critique, the bond between Catherine and Heathcliff has to be seen as something that violently transcends affection. It's more like a terrifying codependency.
Or a fusion. It's an existential claim. Catherine's famous declaration, "I am Heathcliff," isn't just romance. It's a statement of shared self-definition so intense that separation means annihilation.
She tells Nellie that if she were in heaven, she'd be extremely miserable.
Because heaven represents separation from Heathcliff, a place where she would only be Mrs. Linton.
So when she chose Edgar, she fundamentally destroyed herself. She chose stability and status, but made herself miserable.
And you see the intensity of that broken fusion in their final, devastating meeting. Nellie observes their final embrace was one from which Catherine would never be released alive. It's literally a death grip.
And Heathcliff's anguish isn't just grief. It's existential rage at the betrayal. He screams at her ghost, "You loved me. Then what right had you to leave me? What right answer me for the poor fancy you felt for Lyndon?"
He's demanding a structural answer to a structural choice. He argues that nothing could have parted them, but she, of her own free will, chose the system. She chose the Grange, the wealth, the status, and that's why love fails the first generation.
Catherine's passion, no matter how intense, just wasn't enough to overcome the structural incentives of class.
She admitted it. She told Nellie that Edgar is handsome and young and cheerful and rich and loves you. That systemic incentive security was just too powerful. Her breakdown is the body's manifestation of the individual will failing against structural reality.
She literally chooses death over life in a system she finds suffocating.
And this brings us to the haunting. If the love fails because of these structural constraints, then the supernatural elements aren't just spooky additions, they are extensions of the trauma the system created.
Trauma that refuses to be resolved.
Exactly. Lockwood's Dream introduces it. Catherine Linton, a waif for 20 years. She can't rest because the structural reality that separated her in life persists after death.
And Heathcliff's life becomes a living torture because of this unresolved debt. When he hears about Lockwood's Dream, he wrenches open the lattice, sobbing, come in, Kathy, do come."
This is 18 years later, and his grief is as raw as the day she died. He later confirms, "She has disturbed me night and day through 18 years, incessantly, remorselessly."
The ghosts are the system's way of reminding them that their emotional debts were never settled by the legal structures they chose. Heathcliff's revenge was a structural success, but an emotional failure.
And the only way for the system to find peace is for Heathcliff to physically exit it. He essentially starves himself emotionally and physically because he cannot reconcile the world with his single obsessive focus on Catherine.
Okay, so let's look at the second generation, because this is where Brontë offers a path to redemption. She shows how the cycle can finally be broken.
The second generation, Hareton, Linton, and young Cathy, are products of the previous generation's failures. They are born into this toxic structure.
Hareton is the most pitiful example. Systematically deprived of education, Heathcliff leaves him to be a brute. He's awkward to speak and suffers from this immense mortification and wrath when reminded of his illiteracy.
His situation is a mirror image of Heathcliff's youth, but crueler because it's deliberate. Heathcliff was excluded by accident of birth. Hareton is excluded by design.
Linton Heathcliff, meanwhile, is the literal manifestation of weakness used for property gain. Frail, peevish, selfish. Heathcliff despises him, using him only for his prospective owner status.
He's just a pawn in the inheritance game, a sickly boy forced into a brutal marriage with Cathy, just to ensure the Grange falls legally under Heathcliff's control. It's the ultimate transactional relationship.
And initially, young Cathy perpetuates the exclusionary system perfectly. She's raised with the entitlement of the Grange. When she first meets Hareton, she scorns his roughness, calling him a servant.
She's repulsed. She says, he's not my cousin Ellen. And when he tries to be friendly, she cries, "I can't endure you." This is the exact moment of class exclusion that doomed her mother's generation, reenacted by the daughter.
So what breaks the cycle?
It's a systemic change rooted in education and empathy. The cycle is broken when Cathy rejects the class narrative she inherited and chooses to invest in Hareton's potential through shared intellectual labor.
She starts by reading to Nellie when Hareton is there, leaving books around, slowly chipping away at the degradation Heathcliff imposed on him.
And Hareton resists at first, fearing humiliation. But Cathy persists, and when her sincere commendations acted as a spur to his industry, his transformation accelerates. He realizes he is not destined to be a brute.
His honest, warm, and intelligent nature, once it's freed from the clouds of ignorance and degradation by her teaching, it rapidly develops.
The transformation of Hareton, achieved through intellectual and emotional labor rather than property exchange, is the true resolution of the novel. Their bond is based on mutual support and intellectual elevation.
They read together, they learn together, they treat each other as equals, something Catherine and Heathcliff were structurally unable to do.
And Nellie notes their eyes become precisely similar, and they're those of Catherine Earnshaw. This suggests that the best qualities of the past can be redeemed through companionship and education instead of being corrupted by the pursuit of property.
The novel's ending, with their marriage, is a structural reset. The power dynamic shifts from one based on debt and inheritance to one based on mutual respect.
So to really see this as a novel of systems, we should map its components.
Okay, let's start with the actors. You have the two houses, Heights versus Grange, and the three families, Earnshaw, Linton, and Heathcliff, all interlocked. And you have the servants, Nellie and Joseph, who are not passive. They are facilitators.
The incentives are overwhelmingly material. Ownership of the properties, social status being a gentleman or a lady, and control Heathcliff's primary motivation.
Then you have the guiding narratives. The belief in entitlement, like Hindley's birthright. The narrative of destiny, that Catherine and Heathcliff were doomed to be one. And the belief that intense passion can substitute for justice.
Which all feeds the vicious feedback loop. It starts with exclusion, Heathcliff's status. That breeds obsession, Catherine's choice, Heathcliff's focus. That requires revenge, Heathcliff's tyranny, and property acquisition. And that's locked in through inheritance.
And that cycle sustains itself for 18 agonizing years. But Heathcliff's final breakdown is the system devouring itself. He's achieved everything, but the joy is just overridden by his agonizing, solitary inability to escape his obsession with Catherine.
He literally loses the will to live in the world he engineered. When he sees young Cathy and Hareton together, redeemed through companionship, they cause him pain, amounting to agony.
They're mocking his triumph, just by existing, showing him the peaceful path he was too damaged to ever walk.
He confesses that he has to remind himself to breathe, almost remind my heart to beat. His existence has been devoured by his obsession.
The young couple, who look like a spectral mirror of the woman he loved, serve as a fatal reminder of his own failure to choose humanity over property.
And his life force is just consumed by that singular, unfulfilled wish to be reunited with Catherine, leading him to his death. And that's what allows Nellie to observe that the two young people will marry and shift to the Grange, signifying a return to balanced order.
So Wuthering Heights ultimately reviews this devastating truth about power and desire in a structured society. The rigid 19th century system of inheritance and class didn't just cause bad luck, it actively created the destructive force known as Heathcliff.
His intense desire, separated entirely from any concept of social justice, became tyrannical power. His love was inherently selfish and destructive, and he used his entire life to systematically torment others for his own morbid satisfaction.
And the liberation achieved by the second generation is the key lesson. The tragic first generation chose passion or stability, but failed to find structural equity.
Liberation only happens when the second generation chooses mutual support and intellectual elevation. Hareton learning to read, Cathy sacrificing her social pride, instead of perpetuating the toxic incentives of property and exclusion.
The removal of Heathcliff's destructive will allows the system to finally reset, leading to that final, quiet observation of peace on the moors. A peace based on genuine equality, not financial domination.
So, as you reflect on this dark but strangely redemptive book, consider this final thought. What societal systems today are so rigid, whether they're economic, political, or social, that they turn intense personal feelings like love, resentment, or ambition into self-destructive or tyrannical forces across generations? Where does the structure still force impossible choices?
A powerful question to carry forward. We credit Emily Brontë for giving us a text that remains a devastating social critique centuries later, one that understands that the greatest violence is often not spontaneous, but engineered. We encourage you to read the book yourself and support libraries and literary archives. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.